Hi everyone, welcome to I Make Stuff. This week we're actually going to be playing with resin. This video is going to be separated into two parts. It's going to have two different projects in here. I have bought some resin molds from Wish. They are silicone molds. The first one I want to show you guys is these earring resin molds, and I bought two sets. The reason why is each set comes with 4 different shapes. I did not want to wait for a mold to cure and then remake the resin and then use that same mold. So I bought 2 of the same. They were pretty cheap. They came out to about $2 total shipped. And the next mold that I have, let's open it. Is a coaster mold, and I'm actually going to be using this today. And the last one. This one is a variety of different pendant molds, so there are 5 of them in here. I'm going to use these in a different project. So the first thing I'm going to do with this mold is try to make a Game of Thrones coaster, because I love Game of Thrones. So let's remove this. And the mold is very thin on the bottom, and I'm hoping that it doesn't rip when I use this. The bottom is very thin, but the sides are actually pretty thick. So you can see here it kind of is a little floppy. So what I'm going to do is make a clear coaster with a vinyl decal right in the middle of it. I'm using Promarine epoxy, which is equal part epoxy, and I'm going to be using the coaster mold. I am actually going to be using 2 different cups to do my measuring, because my cup is currently on its way from Amazon, and I have already marked a line in the cup so that I can approximate the actual parts of the resin. So one is going to be my mixing cup and the other one is going to be my measuring cup for now. I already poured out part A, so I'm just going to pour this into my mixing cup. And I am using craft sticks to combine both parts right now. I am looking for some silicone mixing sticks. So if anybody has any recommendations, please let me know. So I'm just going to try to scrape as much as I can out of the measuring cup. And I'm also using a silicone mat underneath my working area, just in case I spill anything. I have already measured the volume of the coaster, and it's actually 1 little small cup, so which is perfect. I don't have to use 2 cups. Any extra I'm actually going to be using for a different project. So this is part B, and I'm going to pour it into the cup with the line measured. And now I'm going to combine both parts. I am going to make sure that when I mix, I don't violently mix it, because if I do, I'm going to cause a lot of air bubbles, which won't look nice in my final product. So I'm going to slowly mix the resin. But also I have to make sure that I mix it evenly. There are ways for you to get rid of the bubbles by using heat, as well as using a little sharp object to just poke it out. So for my coaster, what I want to do is pour half of this resin into this mold, wait for it to cure, and then all of the extra resin that I have in this cup is actually going to go into different projects. And then when it has cured, I'm going to put vinyl on top of the coaster and then make more resin and cover the vinyl and pretty much seal it inside. So we're going to do half of the coaster right now. So I have my resin mixed and I'm going to slowly pour it in to the mold. And the reason why I want to slowly do it is so that I do not create more bubbles than there already is. I'm going to use the craft stick to push it into the corners. Right now I have some bubbles in here, but I've read that most of these bubbles actually come up on their own as it starts to cure. So here is about half of my coaster. I'm just going to leave it. So what we're going to do now is move this over to a flat surface and we're going to let it cure so that I can put my decal on there. So it's been a few days and as you can see, the resin is pretty hard now. It has cured. I let it cure for about 3 days, mainly because I've been busy, but I noticed that after about 24 hours, it was hard. I have my silicone mixing cup now, so I'm going to be using this to mix my resin in along with a craft stick. And as I mentioned before, I'm going to be putting a decal in the middle of it. So I have my vinyl and I have my cutting mat ready, and I'm just going to put this down onto the cutting mat. And then I'm going to start cutting. So now that the vinyl decal has been cut, I'm going to remove the extra vinyl. And I cut the decal out at 3.5 inches since the coaster is 4. Just going to remove the unneeded vinyl. So while I do this, I'm going to make sure that everything I am using is clean. So I'm going to use just a damp towel to wipe the vinyl decal as well as the coaster. Let me move this out of the way. So I have the decal cut, and then I'm going to use transfer tape to transfer that over to my coaster. The transfer tape I'm using, I don't know if you guys have been watching my videos, but it is a AT60 transfer tape, and I use this all the time. I'm using a little scrap piece mainly because this is one whole piece and I don't really have to worry, but I just needed to pick it up from the backing sheet. So I have the vinyl picked up, and then I'm going to place it onto the coaster. I'm going to make sure I don't have any air bubbles in here. Remove the transfer tape. And here you go. So this is the Targaryen symbol. And I'm going to now mix some resin and pour it right over the top. Then I'm going to let it cure. So I have my equal part resin. This is the Pro Marine, as I mentioned earlier. And I'm going to use my silicone mat again because I don't want to get it onto my table. And I actually want to show you guys my silicone mat. So as you can see here, I have little pieces of my previous project and it just lifts right off. So if you are going to be using resin, I highly recommend using silicone mat or wax paper and just let it cure onto the silicone mat. And then once it's cured, just peel it right off. So here we go. We're going to mix a little bit of resin, only just enough to cover the top. And I have little markings here, which are kind of hard to see. And I'm just going to do about 20 milliliters. You know what? Let's just go with, yeah, 20 milliliters of epoxy. Okay, so that's part B. Now I'm going to pour the second part in. Now that I have the epoxy poured in, I am just going to keep mixing. And the instructions for Promarine tell me to mix for about 3 to 5 minutes. So I'm just going to keep doing that for a little bit. Now that the epoxy has rested for a little bit, I am going to slowly pour in the epoxy on top of the vinyl. I also want to make sure that there isn't much dust on it. And then I'm just going to slowly pour it over. There's also still bubbles that are in the epoxy, but I have noticed that it will slowly rise up to the top. And then I don't have to worry about it too much. I was able to pop some of the bubbles using a pin. So I'm going to spread out the epoxy. Make sure that it has even coverage. And it's also that it's in the corners. So now that the final layer is on top, I'm going to put this on a flat surface to let it cure. Over time, these little bubbles that are inside the resin will rise to the top and pop. Any of the larger ones, I'm going to use a pin to pop them. So it's been about 24 hours and I had put a top coat on top of the vinyl yesterday. So I'm going to remove it from the mold, and I can already see that I have a whole bunch of little tiny micro bubbles, and I was looking online and it looks like I might have mixed my resin at a temperature that was too cold. So I'm going to have to redo this, but I'm pretty excited about how this came out because I love that you can't really tell where the end of the vinyl is, but what I would have to do is I would have to sand the bottom of it so that it is nice and shiny, or I don't even have to do that. I can put a cork backing to it so that when I put it on the table, it doesn't slide. I do have to clean up the edges because I over poured just a little bit, so I have a little bit of a little piece right here, but I can just sand that down. So here's my first coaster. It is the Targaryen sigil, and I'm going to try to make the other houses just for fun, but I'm going to also try to do it at a temperature that isn't too cold. The recommended temperature for the Promarine resin is 75 degrees, and most likely my house was a little colder than that because when I mixed it, it was actually one of the colder days. So I'm going to definitely try again, and hopefully I can fix this issue with the micro bubbles inside the resin. For the most part, it's the tiny little bubbles that you can see within the resin, so it's not completely clear, but it is fully cured. You can hear how hard it is, and that's it. This is my first resin project, and next week I'm going to be making more resin projects. I want to thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next week.